Hello everyone. This week we're doing another build video, but you can read titles, you already knew that. So one of the things that's limiting my ability to produce better quality content for this channel is the hardware that I'm using to create the videos. As I discussed in my channel update video, I'm using video editing software that is highly CPU dependent. And basically the more threads that I can throw at it, the better. So I'm going to be going through the entire process of selecting parts and building a computer that will be able to better handle the video needs of this channel. So right now I'm rocking a 4-core processor, and the CPU that I'm looking at is going to be 16. I'm going to take you through the process of actually selecting the parts and what the decision process is like for actually choosing those parts and putting them all together and how it all comes together. I feel like a complete build video is kind of hard to find sometimes, because sometimes they just tell you what's in it and show you the finished product, and I kind of like unraveling that a little bit. I kind of like getting into the weeds of why I chose this part over that part and really starting a discussion about it. So that could be kind of fun. Okay, so we're gonna talk about the process by which I chose the parts for this machine. Okay, so the first thing to consider about this particular build that we're going to be doing here is whether or not we're going to go with an 8700K or a 2700X. Now, AMD and Intel use different architectures, and I'd have to buy a different motherboard for each one, and the CPU is the heart and soul of this whole operation since the video editing is very CPU heavy. So really, choosing the correct CPU right off the bat is going to be our highest priority. Now, comparing the i7 with the Ryzen 7, we see that there is a 10% bump in effective speed on the 8700K. Now, this site, like a lot of these other sites, are really mostly focused on gaming. Single core performance is 12% faster. Single core, again, 4% mixed on here. Quad core is a little better. And value and sentiment, it's saying it's 92% more valuable for the 8700K. Now, the problem with that is that for what we're doing, the threads matter. And the 8700K is a 6-core machine. Now, you'll notice that this plus 12% for single core and quad core over here on the 8700K is matched by the overclock multi-core speed on the 2700X. And the real reason that this value and sentiment is plus 92% is that it's just a lot more people have them, and that's it. That's really it. This is cheaper by 17%, so that's what we're going to go with because of the higher multi-core speed. And as we see here, there's a higher core count, higher thread count, slightly newer manufacturing. There's a lot of pluses in the columns of things that actually matter for the purposes of building a CPU-heavy machine here. For gaming, the 8700K is without doubt the king. But for what we're doing, multi-threading, this is the way to go. And this is brought out further by the pass mark score for these. Let me zoom in a little bit here for you. So you'll see that the 2700X actually edges out in pass mark over the 8700K. And in addition to the CPU itself being a little bit cheaper, we'll also find, if we were to do the entire process that I did for this build, that the components for the motherboard are also cheaper. So this is the way to go. This is, for me, a better value for what we're going to actually be doing with this machine. So we come to our builder on PC Part Picker, and this is the final version of this machine. Now, I didn't buy all of these components from these places. I went with Amazon for everything because I wanted to get everything quickly, and I trust Amazon more, frankly. I'm much more used to it. And a couple of things, as you'll see, I ended up buying elsewhere because I had gift cards or a better price. So the build process on PC Part Picker is great because as you add components, compatibility becomes relevant. And let me show you what I mean by that. So we're going to start out with our 2700X. We know exactly what we want, and it's this guy right here. So another thing I like to do on PC Part Picker is set a price larger than 0, because then it'll actually be something I can actually buy. And since I'm relatively new, I like to get products with ratings on them, components that other users have actually built with, just so I know that I'm dealing with something that is probably going to work. And I'm going to show merchants here and select Amazon because that's what I did at the time. So we've got the 2700X right here, and we're going to add that to our build. Now, having done this, it will no longer recommend motherboards that are incompatible with this processor, which is perfect. Now this processor actually comes with a cooler, so we can skip this section entirely. We're going to go straight on down to the motherboard. Now my plan is to buy a total of 4 RAM sticks by the time this is done, so I'm going to want to specify, first of all, that we want something with a price that I can buy today, and something that someone has used in a build before and reviewed. Now, I'm also going to go, see, this is what I was talking about before with the compatibility. The AM4 socket is the only socket that will be available to you when you've selected that processor, so you're not going to see things that are going to not fit your processor physically. I'm going to go with a micro ATX build here because I just really like that form factor. I debated a mini ITX, but then you start having problems fitting in the video card, so I'm going to just leave that alone. Now, I'd like to have a couple of SATA 6GB ports. SATA 3, so I'm going to bump that up to 4 because video editing takes a lot of space and I like to be able to add drives later. And that's going to be the theme that runs through this entire build. I want to have space to grow. So I'm going to have an M2 slot here because I like the speed of NVMe. It's beautiful. Now we're going to have 4 RAM slots. There we go. And we're also going to want at least one PCIe X16 slot so that we can fit our video card in. And I also want to have onboard USB 3.0 headers because I use USB 3.0 a lot. If I'm going to be doing video editing especially, I'm going to want to be able to do this. And I don't particularly care about wireless networking. I have a wired network in my house for most things, and that works fine for me. So I don't actually need wireless. If I need it later, I can add a PCIe card. Now, here's what we get. Now, ultimately, I ended up going with the AceRock AB350M Pro 4. There were some reviews on the Gigabyte that weren't so fantastic, not here on Amazon, and this one, while it has a lower star rating here on PC Part Picker, has 46 reviews and seems to be working for those people. So that's ultimately what I went for. You'll notice this is sorted not exactly by price, but this is the one I went with because it has the overclocking options, and that's what I went with at the time because I believe it was actually a little bit cheaper than it is now. Now, we'll move on to memory. Now, again, we're going to say we want something that has a price and has reviews. I don't much care what those reviews are, just that people have actually used them. And I'm going to go with the DDR4 3000 MHz because that is the speed which, when you look up the specifications for the processor, 2933 is actually the maximum speed you can have for your RAM. So I want to be just slightly higher than that because it's actually pretty rare to find RAM with 2933 as its default. So what we're going to do is we're going to underclock this 3000 RAM down to 2933 so the processor can use its full bandwidth without having to overclock it past what it's rated for because I don't want to have to introduce any bizarre cooling into this. I just don't have the experience. Now I wanted to start out with 16 gigabytes. I don't much care if it's one 16 gigabyte stick or 2 8 gigabyte sticks or 2 times 1 8 gigabyte sticks. I don't care about that. That's fine with me. So now we're going to sort by price per gigabyte. And then we'll come up with the Corsair Vengeance LPX, which is fine. That is a brand name. I will run with that. And the cast latency is nice, so we're going to run with it. Now we're going to add some storage. Now I went with an NVMe here, so I'm going to just start with that. Okay, so we're going to start with 256 gigabytes because that is the lowest that I reasonably think would be useful for me on this. We're going to go with M2, and that takes out a lot of these options. Then we're going to sort by price. Now I ended up going with the Samsung PM961 NVMe here because it turns out, for the money, this speed is ridiculously better than any of the cheaper options here. So that's what I went with. Now, here's where my build process diverges slightly from what we might be expecting. I like to put in all of the components that I'm going to have in the final finished version of this when it comes to power consumption and things like drive space and things like that. So in keeping with that, we're actually going to buy a second set of this RAM. Not buy, but add to our list. So we've got all those slots filled up. Now you'll see here we have a warning. These parts have potential incompatibilities, see details. Now down here we'll see that some of the motherboards don't have the BIOS update necessary to run that CPU natively when you first start up the machine. I verified with the seller when I purchased this that was going to be not a problem, and AMD also has a program where you can get a loaner CPU and install the firmware update and then ship it back to them. This was not a concern for me. The next warning is this motherboard M2 slot uses one of the SATA channels to access data. That means that even though we have 4 SATA 3 ports, we're only going to be able to use a maximum of 3 of them when this machine is built with one of those NVMe sticks in there. And this motherboard actually has a second M2 slot, so we could use 2 of those SATA channels just for NVMe, and we're still going to only be able to use 2 of the SATA ports. So that's a bit crummy. That's one of the things you find in these cheaper boards. You know, that's fine with me. I'm working within the constraints of what I've built. So we're going to add some additional storage here, and in this case I'm going to add 3 hard drives, and I'm going to want some beefy hardware here, mostly for storage, mostly for speed. I'm going to want to balance somewhere in the middle of those 2 things. So let's get a price here. And we're going to start with the 2 terabyte range because, again, we're working with video. It's going to be heavy. We're going to go with the 7200 RPM here because I want quick seek times, and we're going to go with SATA 3, or SATA 6 gigabytes per second. SATA 3 is the standard. And we're going to stick with our 3.5 inch drives, just to be clear about that. All right, so then we're going to sort by price per gigabyte, and we'll find that these Toshiba drives at 4 terabytes are the best deal. Now, a little further down are the 6 terabyte drives. That would be kind of nice in this build, especially if we do end up adding additional NVMe or something, because then we would be able to get 12 terabytes total storage with a second NVMe, or 18. It would be nice, but I'm not going to be too crazy about this just because this is purely for power consumption that we're looking at this and to know what we're up against. So remember, we're going to add 3 of these. Now, the problem I don't particularly care for on PC Part Picker is that this warning, there's no way to dismiss any of it, so you can't really tell if there's anything new here without scrolling all the way to the bottom and be like, oh yeah, I already looked at all that. Okay, so far we're up to 263 watts, but now comes the video card, and that's where most of the power is going to go. So again, we're going to choose some price that we can actually buy, and we're going to have some ratings. Now, what I want to do is, I'm debating eventually putting a 1080 Ti in something. Let's just choose that, and whatever comes up first. So let's go with this Asus one. Perfect. That's an $809 video card. Obviously, that is not what I'm going to end up with in this machine. Now we get to choose a case, and since we're doing a micro ATX build, I would like to have a micro ATX case that can also fit a 1080 in it. Now you'll notice our power has bumped up to 513 watts, which is a significant jump, meaning that like 300 watts are consumed by this 1080 card. Now that sounds about right, unfortunately. So next we're going to choose our case. Now, we know some things about this case. We know that it's going to have to fit all those drives and that video card in it. Now, I don't remember exactly... Oh, okay, so let's just do these in order. So we're going to want to do a micro ATX mini or mid tower. Any of those would be nice for us. There are some other form factors available. I'm not particularly in love with any of them. This is just one of those things you have to look at a couple of builds and kind of know what size constraints you're going to want to work within. We're going to get a front panel USB 3.0 because, as I have said, I will use a lot of that, especially when transferring content off of my laptop onto my desktop and stuff. It would be nice to have access to it without having to go behind the machine. Now, we're going to have a micro ATX form factor. Now, eventually I might want to add an external 5.25 inch bay, so I'm going to have just one there, because I do have a media server in my house, and I will leave it up to your imagination why I might want a 5.25 drive. So, we know that we're going to have 3 internal 3.5 drives, and we probably won't have any 2. And that's about all we need. The NVMe, the other nice thing about NVMe is that it doesn't take up any drive space. It just rests on the motherboard like any other component. So, now we've got our short list of beautiful cases to choose from. And I ended up going with the Cooler Master N200 because I didn't particularly care for any of the aesthetics of these ones here. And this one had, as the name might suggest, quite a bit of cooling capacity to it. And it's a very popularly reviewed item on this site, so that is what I went with. Now, this case does not come with a power supply, so that's the next thing we're going to have to choose. Now, in our ideal version of this build, we're up to 513 watts. And the rule of thumb with power supplies is 1, that you never go cheap, and 2, you never go for exactly how much power this rating gives you. Now, under peak load and other situations, there are going to be a lot more power draws on that device, and you don't want to end up in a situation where you don't have the ability to deliver enough power. Increasing the maximum wattage of your power supply doesn't cost that much more. In fact, it's pretty easy to get way more than you need. And it's one of those things where wouldn't you rather feel safe having a 100 watt buffer? The reason you never go cheap with a power supply is that it's connected to every single device in your computer. If it goes, it takes everything with it. I do wish that the minimum wattage would match your current power requirements. I do think there's room for improvement on PC Part Picker on that area. So let's go with 550 watts minimum. Actually, what I did at the time was 650 watts, so let's do that. And we're ATX. That shouldn't matter too badly. And I went with fully modular as well because I felt that if I was going to add things later, it would be nice to have those extra connectors and everything. I wasn't exactly sure what I would need for this because I haven't built a computer in a very, very, very long time and never from scratch. So always had a couple of Frankensteins out in the shed. Now, 80 plus bronze, gold, titanium, platinum, any of those metals will do just fine. I'm making a joke, of course. These are the efficiency ratings, and I would like for it to be as efficient as possible, but 80 plus is just a little lower than I would like. Bronze is something I could live with. Gold is really the sweet spot in terms of pricing. And fanless, well, it's not really going to matter because at this wattage, you need a fan. It's just that simple. So then we sort by price. Now, I ended up going with the EVGA Supernova 650 here. There was some particular reason, and I think it was probably price at the time. But this one is, again, a very popular one that's reviewed often here on PC Part Picker, and people seem to love EVGA for this sort of thing, so that's exactly why I went with it. Everything else on this page is actually extraneous for the purposes of our build. You'll notice that there are no new additional issues or incompatibilities. I'm going to go with Linux on this build, so I don't actually need to purchase Windows licenses or anything like that. I'm not going to do the optical drive today because I have a USB 3 one that does really well for me, and since we have the USB 3 headers on this machine, I think it's likely I'll end up going with that. The only reason I would ever purchase one for this is if I wanted faster read speeds or something like that, and frankly the read speed off the drive is not that major of a difference for me to invest another $100 in a drive that I already have that works just fine. I already have a monitor, I already have keyboards and all the rest of it. I have an Ethernet cable ready to go, so I don't need any wireless networking adapters or anything like that. The reason I ended up going with this case in addition was that some of these lower end models came up with a warning that the video card wouldn't physically fit. And I wish that there was a way that you could actually determine that when you're filtering through all the cases, but it just came up as an incompatibility, and I said, okay, well, go back and reselect it. Again, the purpose of this is that I want to be able to grow. So now that we've maxed it out and we're looking at a $2,000 computer, it's time to take off some components to get the realistic build that I'm actually going to make for myself. So I'm going to go back to 16 gigabytes of RAM. I'm going to take off these 3 hard drives. And I'm going to change out the video card. Now, I had a heck of a time choosing a video card because I don't really do a lot of intense gaming. I would like to get into it more, but I really don't think, especially with the monitor I currently have, which is only a 1050 at 60 frames a second, that I'm gonna be able to really make use of most of this graphics card. So I ended up swapping out the video card based on what GPU could I get with the best performance or value or something under $300. And according to gpu.userbenchmark.com,
that would be the NVIDIA GTX 1060 3GB. So that's what I ended up going with for this price. And yeah, that's basically how we got to our build here. And this is the final version of it. The prices are a little different, like I said, because I purchased mostly from Amazon and a few other stores that I had gift cards for. But yeah, this is a solid machine. I think this is going to be something I really enjoy working with, especially for video editing, since it is so CPU heavy, and this CPU is kind of the titan of the desktop multi-core world. Now, obviously, there are CPUs out there that have more cores, there are faster CPUs out there, but for something that I can slap together quickly with standard parts and actually afford without having to buy very specific hardware to be compatible with it, this is definitely the way to go. And yeah, that's how I chose all the parts for it. You notice our power consumption dropped to 309 watts with the removal of the 1080 Ti. We only have a 1063 gigabyte in there now, so that's not so bad. I ended up going with the super cooled version of this video card because there was better cooling, according to Amazon users and things like that. It has an additional fan in it, so that was really the way to go. It's also labeled as VR ready by Best Buy. I'm not exactly sure what the threshold for that is. Apparently it's the difference of adding another fan and slightly upping the clock speed on the graphics card. I'm not sure that I'll ever be using this thing for VR, but for now, this will perfectly meet my needs. One of the other disadvantages of choosing the Ryzen processor is that you do have to buy some sort of graphics card with it, because unlike the i7, it does not include any graphics built into it. Now, that actually works to our benefit here, because we were going to buy a graphics card in the end anyway for gaming or whatever we're going to end up doing streaming-wise or something like that, so it kind of forces me into having to choose a video card of some kind. So we are heading up to pick up the heart and soul of this computer build, the CPU, from Micro Center, which is an hour away from where we live. We are here. There it is. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. This is gonna be awesome. So it may seem like I'm not actually saving much money by doing this because it's only $30 cheaper than it was on Amazon, and driving an hour away from home sounds like you'd burn through that money just driving. But actually, I happen to have a gift card that turns it into an $80 deal for me. So that right there does it. But I also drive a ridiculously efficient car. So right now I've gotten 60 miles per gallon getting here. And you know, that definitely puts it well within the range of actually saving money on this. All right, the moment and the parts have all arrived. So we've got our Cooler Master case up here. Got our 256 gigabyte NVMe SSD right here. It's a little overexposed. Let's see if we can. That's a little better. We've got our 16 gigabytes of DDR4 3000 megahertz RAM here. We've got our Ryzen 7 2700X processor here. We've got the motherboard down here, the ASRock AB350M Pro 4, and the EVGA 3GB GTX 1060, super clocked, which means really just better cooling as we discussed. And we've got the power supply for 650 watts on the off chance that we're going to have to do that at some point. So, let's get to the build. Alright, first thing I'm going to open is this box here with the case in it, because we're going to have to deal with that first, I should think. Go. Okay, so this is going to be one of those. Let's do like this. Gotta get that dramatic effect. Thank God I'm filming this. This isn't awkward at all. So it's stuck on the handles of the box. I will explain it. Let's pop that up like so. There we go. And at least we got the one side. And there. Sooner or later. I'm a smart person, I swear. There we go. All right. There's that. So, styrofoam off. It's got instructions and stuff. Yeah. Look at all the instructions. I think probably a quarter of this is what I actually need. So, first things first, let's get it out of the rest of the packaging. See that everything looks okay. There's gotta be a hole in this somewhere. And there it is. This is slightly bigger than I was hoping, but I think that's ultimately a good thing. It's going to fit everything nicely. I'm not going to peel the plastic covers off until the very end because I know I have very greasy skin and I want it to be as beautiful as possible at the end when we're done. But one of the reasons I chose this case is for the superior cooling. There's vents on all the sides and everything. One big front vent up here. The other thing I wanted was USB 3 headers here. Most of these cases at this price put them for some reason at the top of the case, which might make sense if it's sitting on the floor, which this one will be, but I actually want them here because I know myself, I'm going to put something on top of here at some point and it's going to destroy this. Far more likely than me kicking here or something. So, the next component I'm going to open up is the motherboard, because it will be the heart and soul of the operation. Wow. There we go. Instructions for installing the RAM, these are important. Looks like we've got driver DVD. That's not going to be much use to me since this doesn't have a DVD drive. Nice big thick manual here. Looks like a plate cover for the case. This looks like our SATA cables. Little tiny screws. And then, of course, the board itself. There she is. Nice static free bag here. Looks good. No obvious damage or anything. So we'll hope that that is working electrically. Okay, nothing else in this box, so we're going to toss that aside. We like to get down to basics here on this channel.
Next, I will be doing the CPU, I think. So let's get that open. Oh, that's pretty. That is pretty. Let's save the good bits for a bit. Oh, well, let's see what we have here. Okay. Oh, well. Haha. There she is. That is our CPU that we are hoping to open. So I'm guessing this is the cooler then. Okay, nothing else in here. This does not come with any instructions that I've seen so far, so hopefully the fan will not be too terribly complicated to figure out. Alright. That is our cooler, alright. What a monster. Oh my goodness. I did not realize it was going to be this big. Oh, got some tape issues here. Wow, this is beautiful. Definitely don't want to get my fingerprints on this. Man, that is a beaut. So let's keep that on the plastic piece on the bottom there, just so I don't mess it up. We've got our power cables for it. Looks like USB headers. So we'll put those there. Okay. So that box can go away. Amazing. This is 16 cores. About the size of my thumb. Okay. I'm going to leave the NVMe inside here because this packaging doesn't take up terribly much space, and I know me. So I'm going to lose that if I leave it anywhere else. Next, I'm going to open up the RAM. Now, RAM prices are ridiculously high right now. They're on par with video card prices. Supposedly, the reason for that is a combination between the increase in the demand for servers with high-speed RAM and cell phones. So supposedly that's what's driving that market. I don't know that I believe that. Next, the power supply. Let's get this open. Okay, let's get this going somewhere. Aha! So it opens this way. Now, this is the one component you definitely do not want to get cheap. From what I understand, a cheap PSU is not somewhere where you want to be saving money in your build, because it powers everything, and if it's bad, well, it destroys everything, which could be suboptimal depending on your needs. So, let's get this open. There's a lot of spacers in here. Ah, look at this. All these cables. Oh, they're beautiful. My goodness. Ooh, I like these. Adapter for something, I don't know. We'll have to see. It's like Lego bricks, they either fit or they don't. Lots of cables. I do not know which of these we will need. This looks like the one for the motherboard, considering it says MB on it. So we will find out which of these we need and go from there. So that explains the spacers. And here is... Oh, they taped it. They knew I was filming and they wanted to make me look silly. There we go. Let's get that open. There it is. Now I went with the fully modular one because I don't know exactly what I'm going to need, and I'd like for it to be as modular as it can be. This one comes with a 7-year warranty, so that's exciting. Not too heavy. It's got a fan on it, of course. Most power supplies above some particular threshold wattage do. It's definitely a good thing to keep things from exploding when you're powering a computer. Especially one with a 105 watt CPU such as this build. And that's pre-overclocking. So, we can get rid of this box now. Gonna love editing this video. Alright, next. I just tossed my screwdriver away. It would seem so. Okay, let me grab that. I forgot to grab the manual for this as well, so let's take that. Screwdriver was indeed in the box. So, finally we're gonna open up the video card. Now, the reason that video cards are so ridiculously expensive right now is because they're particularly efficient at the sorts of math that are involved with cryptocurrency mining. And that's why people go crazy for the newest, greatest, craziest cards. And then there's enthusiasts who just want the biggest, best cards they can possibly get. So they can play all the games, no question. Now I went with the 3 GB card on here, so that's pretty exciting. There we go. There's something keeping me from accessing. Okay. Looks like it opens from the side. Alright. Okay. This box is a little confusing. There we go. I believe that's the whole... Oh, wait, well, what do we got here? This looks like the power adapter because it takes slightly different power than what these cables give out, I guess. So we'll figure that out when we get there. And that's it for this box. I hope I don't need to return any of this. Now, let's take a look. Electrostatic sensitive area on this. So I might just leave it in here, but I do need to inspect the merchandise. So let me take this manual and another display driver. So I'm hoping that when we install the operating system, I won't need to do any of this, but we'll see what happens. Man, they got us double protected. So they got a static-proof bag around, wrapped in bubble wrap. This looks beautiful. No damage here. So now all that's left to do is build the computer and see if we have any working electricals. And we'll go from there. So, I'm gonna stop the video, read all these manuals, and see what's what before I start breaking things that are expensive. So, you'll see me in a bit. Hello everyone, it's Editing Mike here again. Now obviously this video is plenty long as it is, and I wasn't going to throw the entire build on at the end here. So, next week will be the actual build process. Until then, stay curious because you don't know if this is going to work.